Hello, I'm attorney Gary Finklea with the Finklea Law Firm in Florence, South Carolina. Following the elections, I thought it would be a good opportunity to address election protests in South Carolina. Following the election this cycle, I've not heard discussions of many irregularities in this state. However, I have heard of others in other states, particularly in some contested congressional races. On the night of the election results, I was at the Florence County Election Commission and did hear reports of irregularities at the polling facilities. I want to describe and explain to you a little bit about an election protest. First, if you find yourself in this situation, you need to seek legal counsel. The process for to protest an election is very specific procedurally. You have certain time limits to file, where to file, and things like that. So let me just run through some of the considerations. The first consideration at the onset is there's no perfect election. The law does not promise nor guarantee, although it seeks to have a perfect election. One never happens. There's always irregularities. The general rule is that the irregularities have to be sufficient enough to change the result of the election. That's the general rule. So regardless of their irregularities, unless the election contest is close, quite frankly, the substantive law does not matter. So let me just run through a couple of issues for you, and I'm going to be referring to a book published by the South Carolina Bar, Election Protest under South Carolina Law. This is not an area of law that any attorney has to deal with in any great degree, and usually when we get the calls, it's from a friend or colleague or someone who we're close to that needs some assistance. Because of course we only have elections. Generally, we only have elections every 2 years, and not many of them are contested. But the very first thing that applies in an election protest is what type of election is it? Is it in the primary? And if so, then the election protest is generally conducted by the party officials. If it, however, is in the general election, then generally your protest is to the county election commission. If it's a statewide or multi-county office, oftentimes your appeal is to the state election commission. So that's the first important thing, is where do you file? Who do you file with? The second question is, when do you file? The time limits to file are short, and of course the reason being is that we want the results of election to be known as soon as possible. For example, when contesting a county-wide seat or a local seat, the notice of protest must be filed by noon on the Wednesday following the election. So, generally that is less than 24 hours that the notice must be filed. The next important issue is once it's filed, that your notice must contain the specific grounds that you're appealing from. So your notice should be as detailed as possible to give the commission or the body sufficient notice of what the issues are. Now, I've already told you that there's no perfect election, and a perfect election shouldn't be expected. I've also told you that the violation must, of course, result in a doubtful opinion. Other time limits that are important is that once the election commission meets and renders a decision, again, there's a short time frame for which you to appeal to the state election commission. And let me mention one final rule to you in regard to election protest, and I regret that more poll managers and workers are not familiar with this, but oftentimes we see folks going to a polling place and being denied the right to vote, and that, quite frankly, should never occur. Now, of course, if the person shows up at the wrong precinct and you know that person should vote at another precinct, that's one thing. But when a voter comes up and says, I know I'm supposed to be at this precinct, I was on this roll, things like that, what the poll manager should always do is to allow that person to cast a provisional ballot. A provisional ballot. In that ballot, it is, at least in the old-fashioned days, quite frankly, I don't know how to do it electronically, but with provisional ballot is sort of put in a stack at the end, and it is not a sure thing. The commission must go through some steps to ensure that that person did vote in the proper polling place, but it's provisional. So poll workers, managers, and voters, if you're ever denied the right to vote, request a provisional ballot to be counted. At least you get to vote, and if it comes down to the wire where, the margin of victory is slim, that provisional ballot may affect the result. So, if you have any questions concerning a local or a statewide protest, you've got to seek legal assistance. You've got to do it immediately. And quite frankly, if you're expecting a close race, you probably need to even have a legal team or consultant on board ahead of time to be prepared to move. Because again, the time frames to protest are short. If our firm can assist, please feel free to call us. If we don't think we can help you, we'll be glad to refer you to another firm. But we can at least get that protest filed for you to preserve your right to protest. Thank you. If you have any other questions, please feel free to call me, Gary Finklea, at 843-317-4900, or you can reach me by email at gfinkley@finkleylaw.com, or visit us on the web at www.finkleylaw.com. Thank you.